mentioned to him that one of the classes I teach is called the Archaeology of the Passover Haggadah. And Danny turned to me and he said, you know, my parents own this very, very beautiful Haggadah. I asked him, what is that? He said, did you ever hear of the Moss Haggadah? So my eyes lit up because when I was an undergraduate at Colgate University, I studied about the Moss Haggadah in a senior seminar on the Passover Haggadah. And it was the dessert of that seminar. And as I sat watching the artistry of this Haggadah unfold, it was like a moment of revelation for me. World of art and the world of Jewish learning that came together in an instant. And so that Haggadah, this Haggadah, has always held a very, very special place in my heart. So my eyes lit up as Danny mentioned the Moss Haggadah, and I figured he was going to tell me that his parents have a coffee table edition of the Moss Haggadah, which I'm holding in my hands right now. So, and I see Diane is holding a copy as well. Instead, Danny Levy turned to me and told me that his parents commissioned the original Moss Haggadah. And he asked me if I was free Thursday evening. And that Thursday evening, he took me over to his parents' home, and Dick Levy, Zichrono Livracha, took the original Moss Haggadah out of the family vault, put it on his drafting table, and there I was that evening explaining the original Moss Haggadah to the family that commissioned it, and literally watching the original colors of this Haggadah dance off the parchment. It was a moment that I will never forget. Very soon after that, I connected with the artist himself, David Moss, and so began a friendship of many, many years. David has since become a partner in a very innovative project here in Jerusalem called Kol Ha'ot, Illuminating Jewish Life Through Art. And what we do in this arts-based project is we teach Jewish history, texts, and values through a synthesis of the arts and texts here in Jerusalem. So without further ado, let's turn to the artistry of David's Haggadah. So I want to ask Dorit and Joan if you could please put up our first illumination. We'll give it a moment. You'll know that we are ready to begin when we see this image on our screen. So a little about David Moss while we're waiting for the image to be shared. David Moss is originally from Dayton, Ohio. Born in 1946, David is single-handedly responsible for the rebirth of the illumination of ketubot, the illumination of Jewish marriage contracts. This is an art that died out at the end of the 19th century and was revived by David in a tiny studio in Berkeley, California. Probably David's most important claim to fame for all of us on this call is that David was a rabbinical student at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He entered the gates of JTS not to become a rabbi, but rather to become fluent in Jewish text. And he felt that the most effective way that he could do that was to enroll as a student in the rabbinical school at JTS. In the 1970s, he perfected his Hebrew calligraphy, ended up in Berkeley, California, and through this business of ketubah commissions, ended up connecting with Richard Levy, who had commissioned him for a number of ketubot of their children. And then in 1980, Richard commissioned David to work on what was supposed to be a one-year commission for a new Passover Haggadah. David was taking this on as a full-time job for a sabbatical year in Israel. And 1 year turned into 4.5 years of David immersed in this project. Joan and Dorit, can one of you message me and let me know where we stand with the sharing?
Yes, Joan is going to put it up in a second. I apologize. We're having another technical glitch here.
Okay, in the meantime, I am going to start off with this first page of the Haggadah. Okay? This is the opening page of the Mos Haggadah. And what you're looking at is an Eitz Chaim design, a tree of life design. This tree of life has 7 branches. David wanted to connect the design to the image of the menorah. And in addition to those 7 branches that you see here, there is an intricate geometric design, a frame that's woven around this entire page. I'm bringing it a little closer so you can all see it. Okay, that geometric frame that you see woven around this tree design is Hebrew micrography. It's tiny, tiny Hebrew script. This is the entire text of Passover Haggadah that is written on one page, that is written on the opening page of David's Haggadah. What David loves to explain is that he wanted to open his Haggadah with an image of spring. And so there you have the blossoming tree. And he felt that the tree represents pure potential, that when you plant a seed, it represents hope, it represents utter potential, it represents the birth of a dream, right? And so there you have this magnificent tree and the entire text right at the beginning on this first page. Right? I wish you could all hold a magnifying glass, right, to this micrography. Okay, this is based on a manuscript of the Haggadah, one of the earliest extant manuscripts that we have of the Passover Haggadah from the 11th century, which was in the manuscript collection of Dropsy College in Philadelphia. Okay. Hopefully we're making progress. In the meantime, I'm turning to the next page of the Haggadah. I see a number of you have the Mos Haggadah as well. Linda and Diane, I see you both paging through it. Wonderful. Okay, we're looking at a calendar that David created here. What you see is a 260-year calendar that tells us when the evening of Seder is going to fall out for all of those years. This design is inspired by what's called the Atbash. I am going to see if I can share screen. Are any of you familiar with the Atbash? Don't all answer at once. I am pulling up the Atbash now. Let's see if I can make this happen. Okay. Great. Okay, if you can see this, just put your thumbs up. Yes, great. Okay, fantastic. Okay, this is the idea that inspired David's rendering of the calendar in the Haggadah itself. And I just realized if I'm able to share that, I am able to share my presentation, and we don't have to rely on the facilitator right now. So that's great. What you're looking at is something that was created within the context of the Gemara of the Talmud. This is called the Atbash. The first 7 letters of the Hebrew Aleph Bet you see on the right side of the page. Okay, Aleph Bet Gimel Dalet Hey Vav, and they're lined up against the last 7 letters of the Aleph Bet, Tav Shin, Reish, Kuf, Tzadi, etc. Each of the first 7 letters represents one of the days of Passover. Aleph is the first day of Passover. So this year, the first day of Passover is Thursday. Tav and the last 7 letters of the alphabet stand for a Jewish observance over the course of the year. Tav is Tisha B'Av. The 9th of Av always falls out on whatever the first day of Passover is. Okay, what's so striking about that? What is it that we celebrate with Passover? With Passover, we're celebrating Geulah, we're celebrating redemption. We're celebrating the freedom of the Israelites and of the Jewish people. Tisha B'Av is just the opposite. Tisha B'Av, we're commemorating destruction. We're commemorating Galut. We're commemorating going into exile. One represents Geulah, the other represents Galut. Right? These are the poles of Jewish history. All of Jewish history plays out between these poles. Now watch this. This is absolutely remarkable. Bet is Friday. That's the second day of Passover. It corresponds to Shin, Shavuot. So Shavuot, if you look ahead in the calendar, it's going to fall out on a Friday. Gimel corresponds to Reish, Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah will fall out on Shabbat later this year. Kuf is Kriyat Torah, the reading of the Torah, which is Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah will be on Sunday. Tzom Kippur, which is Yom Kippur, that is going to be on Monday. Purim fell out on Tuesday this year. And believe it or not, up until the 20th century, there was nothing that corresponded to the 7th day of Pesach until the birth of the State of Israel. And it turns out that Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day, always corresponds to whatever the 7th day of Passover is. So as you see here, Yom HaAtzmaut this year is going to fall out on a Wednesday. Okay, this always works. This is proof that the rabbis had way too much time on their hands. Okay, so this is an amazing thing to teach at your Seder. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop share and I'm going to pull up the core presentation. Okay. Here we are. Okay, can you all see it? Yes? We're good now? Thumbs up, great. Okay, here is the calendar page that we were looking at. So how is this all connected to the Atbash? Okay, the calendar is woven around a medieval piyut, a medieval poem called B'tzeiti Mitzrayim, B'tzeiti Yerushalayim. In my going out from Egypt, in my going out from Jerusalem. You see the stanzas of B'tzeiti Mitzrayim written large, right? This is the celebration of freedom, going out from Egypt. B'tzeiti Yerushalayim, going out from Jerusalem, commemorates the destructions of both temples, that is, going into Galut, going into exile. Those verses are written very, very small, and they're written backwards, because David wanted to express that going into Galut, going into exile, is an unnatural state for the Jewish people. Each of these cubes that you see here represents a decade, right? And this is the decade that we are in now. You see the arrow where I am. This is the year that we're in, and this tells us that the first day of Passover is going to be Thursday. We wanted to look to see when Passover is the first day of Passover is going to be next year. We would go to this cube, the next decade. This is the first year of that decade, and it tells us that the first day of Passover next year is going to be Sunday, which means that Seder night will be Motzei Shabbat next year. There's David's calendar. Let's move on. In the limited edition of David's Haggadah, this page is a paper cut. Okay, so if you can imagine, the blue that you see there is the background, and the paper cut lifts off of that background. What do we see here? We see the Israelites enslaved in Egypt. They're making bricks. Okay, look closely. I'm going back. Israelites enslaved, making bricks. There are the bricks. Okay, if we flip the page over, the opposite side of this paper cut, what do we have? The Israelites free, baking matzah, right, preparing for Seder. The micrographic frame that you see woven around the illumination is every verse in Tanakh, in the Hebrew scriptures, that contains the word eved, servant or slave. So essentially, what have we done? We have moved from being servants of Pharaoh on this page to becoming servants of God on this page. Okay, here are the 14 or 15 steps of the Seder, right? I say 14 or 15 because it depends on how it is that one divides Motzi Matzah, okay? We divide Motzi Matzah, right? Then we've got 15 steps. If we leave them together, then we've got our 14 steps. These are what we call the simanim, the different steps of the Haggadah, beginning here with Kadesh, the bottom right-hand side, Orchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, Magid, Rachza, Motzi Matzah, etc. David wanted this to look like the steps going up to the temple. Ma'alin b'kedusha, we go up in holiness. Okay, what is the trick or the magic behind this piece? What you're looking at in the center is the legend to the Seder. Just like when you look at a map, we have a legend that helps us decipher the map, so too here. And we have this large map of the entire Seder, and then each of the steps is that map in microcosm. Why did David do this? Because when you look at Kadesh, the blessing over the wine, and you see this empty square, he's telling us that when we get to the Kiddush, you're going to see this symbol. Orchatz, you're going to see this washing vessel. Karpas, we're going to see the greenery. Yachatz, we are going to see the broken pieces of matzah. Clear? Let's move on. Okay, here we are at a very, very dramatic Kiddush page, right? We just went through this very, very cool legend of the Passover Seder that tells us what symbols we're going to see as we get to the different simanim, the different steps of the Haggadah. So here's our first siman. You see the Kiddush cup in the top right-hand corner, right? Shake your head if you see the Kiddush cup. Yes? Good. Okay, what's going on here, right? There's this very, very strange and somewhat threatening image or group of images that we see. This is all connected to the Rashi Tevot, a Hebrew acronym known as Yaknahaz. What is Yaknahaz? Yaknahaz is the rabbinic acronym that the rabbis created for when Seder falls out on Motzei Shabbat. Things get complicated Saturday night when Seder falls out then. Why? Because we have the ritual of Havdalah in addition to everything that we're doing for Seder. So then the question in our minds is, what is the order of ritual when Seder falls out on a Saturday night? The rabbis created this handy-dandy mnemonic device, Yaknahaz. It stands for Yayin, wine, Kiddush, sanctification of the day. Ner, that's the N sound, which is candle. Havdalah, the blessing of separation. And then finally, the blessing of time, Berkat Zman, which is the Shehechianu prayer. Well, it turns out that in medieval manuscript Haggadot, one often sees a very, very interesting image of a rabbit hunt. Give me a moment. I'm going to stop the screen share so I can show you a picture of the rabbit hunt. Okay, you can all see me now? Good. Okay. So in my Haggadah, I printed out an image from the Prague Haggadah 1526, right? And there it is, okay? The image of the rabbit hunt. So why is it that they printed these images of the rabbit hunt next to the Kiddush? How does this connect to Yaknahaz? Because Yaknahaz sounds like the German Jagdin which means hunt the hare. And so Ashkenazic Haggadot, medieval printed Haggadot, would put this image of the rabbit hunt next to the Kiddush. A number of scholars believe that it's not only there for the purposes of a visual being a mnemonic device for the mnemonic device, but also because the hunted hare represents the persecuted Jew. What you're looking at on this page of the Haggadah are coats of arms of nations that have persecuted the Jews all throughout history. What do they have in common? The eagle as their national symbol. This is the coat of arms of Antiochus Epiphanes, the villain of the Hanukkah story, the coat of arms of Vespasian, who's responsible for the destruction of the Second Temple, Hadrian, who put down the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135 CE, in which we lose sovereignty in the land of Israel to the Romans, right? The year that we regain sovereignty, by the way, is when? 1948. 1940, think about that for a moment, what a miracle that is. So there's Hadrian. This is the coat of arms of the city of Trent. 1475, there was a famous blood libel there. These are the coats of arms of Pope Clement III and Innocent IV, two popes that were exceptionally mischievous with regard to the Jews. Mischievous, read anti-Semitic. Here we have a Polish coat of arms, right? This is the coat of arms of the city of Ashvisum, of Auschwitz, an early German Reichsadler. And then finally, right, what's obvious to us all, the Nazi symbol. Notice that the rabbit is in the talons of the eagle. And then what do we have in this last box? The rabbit is hopping out of the box, and look where the rabbit is jumping to. Baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Thank you, God, for having sustained us and kept us in life to reach this day. Right? Absolutely brilliant. Right? There's that rabbit jumping out into, right, right, to the bracha on the opposite page. David points out that this has been criticized both by Israeli Jews and American Jews. Why do Israeli Jews criticize it? Right, because of the portrayal of the Jews as being persecuted, as being passive in their own destiny. Why are American Jews uncomfortable with this page? What is the national symbol of America? Right? The eagle. Right? And some say that what David was alluding to in this circle is the bald eagle. right? Pretty chilling. Please God, it should never happen in America. But the other interesting twist on all of this is that David made Aliyah just after completing his Haggadah. So some believe that this is David, the rabbit, who's hopping out toward Shehachianu here. A very powerful piece. Onward to the next slide. Okay, halach ma'anya. Right, this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. What David did here is he created this very, very intricate woven piece of matzah that is held up on the shoulders of different generations of Egyptian Jews. Right? He was marveling at the fact that on the one hand, Torah forbids us from ever going back to the land of Egypt, but in reality, we know that Egypt, right, played home to many generations of Jews and a very, very rich, intellectually rich and materially rich Jewish community. Manishtana halala hazeh. Here we have the 4 questions. You're going to have to squint a bit to see what I'm pointing out. In the limited edition, this page is actually a paper cut as well. Okay, you could see a bit of the relief. Okay, there isn't enough contrast in this, but you could see some of the relief here. What David did is he based this paper cut on a teaching from the Talmud, Masechet Psachim 116a, which says the following. Ideally, the child, here we see the silhouette of a child. Ideally, the son should ask the father the 4 questions. There's the silhouette of the father. Right? David says that he based the silhouette here on the silhouette of his son Yoni at the time. Yoni, who by the way is now a professor at Hebrew University. If the son doesn't know enough to ask questions, then his wife should ask him questions. If the wife doesn't know enough to ask questions, then he should ask himself questions. Right? Think about the import, the resonance of that this year for the many people who, right, might be celebrating Seder alone. And even if they were Shnei Talmidei Chachamim, 2 great Torah scholars that know everything there is to know about Pesach, they still need to ask each other questions. Right? What is this teaching doing? This teaching is underscoring the importance of asking questions Seder night. It's not so much the answers that we give that are the essence of the Seder celebration, but it's being able to ask a good question. If there's one assignment, one homework assignment that you should give to guests at your Seder, or a homework assignment that you should give to yourself, it's to come up with a good question. Think of a good question to ask Seder night, and let that be the 5th question. Here we're looking at the traditional 4 questions, but let that be the 5th question. Avadim hayinu. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. That's the text that we say. The text goes on to read, and God took us out with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm. And if God had not taken us out, if God had not taken our ancestors out from Egypt, then we and our children and our children's children would still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. What did David do here to animate this particular text? If you take a look on the right side of the page, we have a bird cage. Look at the doors of the bird cage. What do they resemble? They look like the gates of Auschwitz. When we open this paper cut, right, the paper cut again lifts off of the background. What do we see? We see these images. Okay, the images that you see here, these bird's head characters, are based on a 13th century Haggadah from Germany known as the bird's head Haggadah. It's a mystery as to why the author, the artist of this Haggadah portrayed humans with bird's head. We have no clue, no idea. However, the hats that you see on these figures are hats that the church in Germany required Jews to wear, right, as a symbol of their otherness in Germany, right? A chilling reminder of the Magen David, the yellow Magen David that they would be forced to wear in the time of the Shoah. So those birds sit behind the cage, right? And there you have the gates of Auschwitz. And again, what David was doing here is he wanted to draw a direct line from the enslavement in Egypt to the persecution of the Jews in the 20th century, right? If God had not taken us out of there, then we and our children and our children's children, right? Not only would we have been enslaved, that would have been the best possibility, but perhaps we would have been no longer. The famous story of the rabbi seated in Bnei Brak. Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Shehayu Misubin B'Bnei Brak. Right, these rabbis were seated in Bnei Brak. They were telling the story of Passover the entire night until their students come in and say, "Rabbis, it's time to recite the morning Shema." It's believed, I mentioned this last week when we gathered, it's believed that that's code language for the beginning of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. So what did David do here? What you're looking at is Hebrew micrography in the center of the page, right? This magnificent sort of fanciful star. The micrography that you see here, the Hebrew writing, these are all teachings on Passover or on the Seder from Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, or Rabbi Tarfon. David looked all throughout the Talmud, gathered their teaching into one place, and then created this very, very cool looking star and placed it at the center of that teaching. Why a star? Bar Kokhba, the son of a star, Bar Kosiba, who led, right, the Bar Kokhba rebellion against the Romans. The four children of the Haggadah: the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. How did David illustrate the four children? They're on a deck of cards. Why did he put the four children on a deck of cards? Because he wanted to communicate, to express that when you have children, you never know what hand you're going to be dealt. Also notice, each of the children is illustrated in relation to the book. The wise child is holding the book reverently. The wicked child is sitting on the book. The simple child, right, in a very, very sort of basic pose. And then the one who doesn't know how to ask is using books to juggle on. It's also fascinating on this page is at the top of the page, you see Baruch 4 times, right? Baruch HaMakom, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenatan Torah Le'Amo Yisrael, Baruch Hu. And then David draws a line from the Baruch all the way down, right? This is the final kaf. And then you see these calligraphic flourishes. Again, this is Hebrew micrography. Each of these flourishes is a blessing because David wanted to express that no matter which child we're dealing with, every single child is worthy of a blessing. Whether it be the wise, the wicked, or the wayward, the simple, or the one that doesn't know how to ask, every single one of these children is worthy of a blessing. Before going on, I want to pause here for any questions that you may have. You can take yourself off mute. Shelley.
In the beginning, you said those words.
You can hear you, Shelley.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Now I can't hear you. Do me a favor, type your question in.
Hello?
Mute.
Yes, everyone else needs to turn themselves on mute.
Everyone
so
is
we can-
muted. Just unmute yourself in your screen if you'd like to speak.
Okay, can you hear me
Okay,
now?
Sally, let's try again.
Okay, in the beginning, you talked about this atbash. I think those are the letters. And you asked, does anybody know what that is? Is that referring to those first 4 letters on the calendar?
Exactly, exactly. I'm sorry I didn't make that clear. Atbash is Aleph Taf Bet Shin, Atbash. Okay, so it refers to the first 4 letters, but that's very, very specifically. Generally, it refers to that chart of the first 7 letters representing the days of Pesach, and then the last 7 letters representing the holidays that we have over the course of the year.
Okay.
Great. Anyone else with a question or comment? Marvin's Mac laptop. Yes. Take yourself off mute.
Press Shift Command A. Hi. I wanted to ask you a question about the Maaseh Rebbe Eliezer in Bnei Brak and the code for Bar Kochba. How do you see that more? Can you speak more about that and Bar Kochba, and should he be considered a hero? He sort of led us down a wrong path.
Look, it's a very, very interesting question. We know that Rebbe Akiva was a major supporter of the Bar Kochba rebellion. But obviously, the question that's always in our minds was, right, it's the same question that we ask ourselves of Masada, right, which is a very, very controversial spot in Israel today, very controversial event in Israeli and Jewish history, right? We ask, right, was Masada the correct response to what it is that the Jews were facing? Because in the end, right, Masada is about martyrdom, essentially. It's not about not being enslaved to the Romans, but in the meantime, right, we have, right, this collective suicide takes place on Masada. The alternative or polar opposite of that is the response of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. What does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai do? He goes to Vespasian and asks Vespasian to establish a place of learning outside of Jerusalem known as Yavna, so that Judaism would have a future, so that Judaism would continue, and so that rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism that we know today, would flourish. So Marvin is asking a great question here, and I think it's a very, very similar issue. When we think of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, right, we ask ourselves, was the answer to rebel against the Romans with force and to lose sovereignty in the land of Israel for 2,000 years, right? Or was there a middle ground? Was there another way to respond? Unfortunately, Siman She'ela, as we say, it's a question mark. We don't know. We simply don't know. But certainly, through the lens of Zionism and Zionist thinkers, we look on Bar Kokhba as a hero, right? One who was not going to sit passively, but one who's going to take his destiny into his hands, even if it meant, coming to, the unfortunate end that it came to. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
One more question or comment before we go back to the artwork. Okay, we're ready to move along.
Fantastic.
Here we are. Okay, from the 4 children. Okay, the Brit Ben Abitarim, the covenant of the parts. Okay, and then the plagues. Here you have each of the 10 plagues: Dam, Tzfardea, Kinim, Arov, Dever, Shchin, etc. Blood frogs, lice, going through all of the 10 plagues to Makat Bechorot, the death of the firstborn. Micrographed around each of the plagues, tiny, tiny Hebrew script. This is the actual biblical narrative that David calligraphed pertaining to each of the plagues. Right? When you look at the design that David used here, it's meant to remind you of the wine that you diminish from the cup. And when you put it onto the napkin, it bleeds into the napkin, either the cloth of the napkin or the paper of the napkin. And that is the feeling that David wanted to give here. Rabban Gamliel haya omer, kol shelo amar shlosha devarim elu v'pesach, lo yatsa yadei chovato ve'eluhen. Rabban Gamliel said that there are 3 things that you have to mention Seder night. And if you don't mention these things, you haven't fulfilled your obligation for the Seder. Pesach, matzah, and maror. Here's the Paschal lamb, right? That very, very cute looking Paschal lamb that none of us on this call would ever want to sacrifice. Right? The matzah, you should know that David created this matzah to be proportional to the halachic amount of matzah that you have to eat when you say the bracha al achilat matzah on Seder night. This is exactly the amount of matzah that you're required to eat. And then finally, we've got the bitter herb. All throughout David's Haggadah, he did another sort of shticky thing, which is that he hid afikomins throughout the Haggadah. Okay, there are 10 places in the Haggadah where he hid an afikomen. I'm going to show you one of the places where he hid an afikomen. The root of the bitter herb, which is right by the arrow here, this is afikomen in Morse code. Okay, so just like I said, the rabbis had way too much time on their hands, so too did David Moss have too much time on his hands, apparently. One of my favorite pages of the Moss Haggadah is this page that we're looking at. And the secret that I'm going to share with you is that the idea that I'm about to describe is not an original thought of David's, but rather is based on a medieval manuscript Haggadah that sits in the rare book room of the Jewish Theological Seminary. This is the page in which we say, in every generation, one is obligated to see himself as if he personally came out of Egypt. David illustrated Jews from all different lands and placed them in the costume of the different lands from which they came. The men are on one side, the women are on the other. The gray that you see here in the limited edition, also the trade edition of the Haggadah, these are mirrors. So if you can imagine this folio page as it opens, as this page opens, each of them sees their own image. And then when it's fully open, you look at the page and you see yourself. David gives a lovely Dvar Torah, which is that you can only see yourself as part of Jewish history when the book is open. And literally that's what happens when you're looking at this page. You look into it, you see yourself as part of that very, very precious chain. Hallelujah. And then the Psalm, B'tzeit Yisrael miMitzrayim, Psalm 114. Believe it or not, the Israelites that you see marching out of Egypt here, each of them is a musical note. Right? This is the traditional tune of B'tzeit Yisrael miMitzrayim. And in the limited edition Haggadah, the parchment, the vellum, is actually scored. So these people are actually musical notes that could be played. Yes, in addition to all of his visual talents, David is a musician as well. Now we come to the end of the Magid section. In the text of the Mishnah, it gives us the structure of how it is that we should tell the story on Seder night. And it says, Matchil bignut u'mesayem b'shevach, that the story we tell should begin with shame and it should end with praise. And it goes on and it says in the Mishnah that we should end with a seal of redemption. What you're looking at is the end of the Magid section. And at the very, very bottom, we have a seal. Okay, in the limited edition, the 500 limited edition copies that David created, this is actually a wax seal. And the seal is based on a chotem, a ring seal that sits in the collection of the Israel Museum. It's a seal from the First Temple period in Jerusalem, and it contains the name of the owner of that seal. His name was Shalom. Okay, this is one of the earliest Hebrew scripts that we have here. You can make out the shin here, then the lamed, vav, and a final mem. However, in David's Haggadah, he simply took this image and then calligraphed, believe it or not, this is micrography of the last 2 chapters of Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, in which Maimonides talks about the coming of the Messiah. So since this page deals with Geulah, redemption, right, David wanted to make the connection between the redemption from Egypt, the redemption at the end of days, and saw it fit to take these last 2 chapters. This is volume 14 of Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, which is tiny, tiny calligraphy that you see here, right? All in the shape of this stamp from the First Temple period. The blessing over the wine. Look at how David calligraphed the blessing over the wine and the blessing over the eating of matzah. Right? It's at an angle. Why is it at an angle? Why is it leaning? Right? Because we should be leaning Seder night. Right? Thank you, Beatrice, for demonstrating. Okay? You have to lean when you drink the wine and you eat the matzah. Okay, if you don't lean, the halakha says you actually have to go back and redo it again. So remember to lean Seder night. Right? The reason that we lean, by the way, is because Seder, it's not the popular idea that we're leaning because we're aristocracy, because we're free people, but it's because the Seder ritual is modeled off of symposia meals. And at symposia meals in Greco-Roman times, what they did is they sat at low tables and they would lean as they would discuss and eat the hors d'oeuvres that were taken to them. Shulchan Orech, right, the set table. This table is actually set for the Levi family. Safun, which is finding the Afikomen. Okay, so here's this very, very curious page connected to the Afikomen. I mentioned to you earlier that David became famous as a Judaica artist because he revived the art of ketubah illumination. The piece that you're looking at here is based on a ketubah from Persian Kurdistan. What is the connection between a ketubah from Persian Kurdistan and the Afikomen? Well, here's the connection. Jews in Kurdistan had the tradition that under the chuppah, the groom would take the ketubah, which was designed in the colors and feel that you see here in front of you, would take the ketubah, roll the ketubah up, and the ketubah would be bound onto the arm of the kala, of the bride, under the chuppah, under the wedding canopy. It turns out that Kurdistani Jews had another tradition, which was that at the Seder table, after the Afikomen was found, they would turn to the most eligible bachelor seated at the Seder table. They would take the Afikomen and they would bind it to his arm. And they would say, just as we bind this Afikomen to your arm, so too may you bind a ketubah to your bride-to-be's arm under the chuppah. Right? It was a blessing given to the most eligible bachelor around the Seder table. What you see here is a quote from Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. Matzati et she'ava nafshi, I have found the love of my soul. David is playing on this, and instead of the typical Hebrew that one would see in a ketubah, which is matzah isha matzah tov, which is if you have found a woman, you have found good. David has calligraphed here, matzah 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 tov. If you have found the matzah, then you have found goodness. You'll also notice in the flowers that we see at the top here, they're not just flowers, they're also clocks that are about to strike midnight, because the afikomen needs to be eaten, right, by midnight, right? And the reason for that is because it was halakha, it was Jewish law that the paschal lamb, right, be eaten by midnight as well. Okay, the page that you're looking at now is connected to the cup of Elijah. Okay, what is so brilliant and majestic about this page of Kos Eliyahu? What you're looking at are dwellings of Jews throughout the ages from various countries. Okay, you'll recognize a bit of Italy, you'll recognize a bit of Morocco, you'll recognize wooden synagogues from Poland. And what David did, again, this is a paper cut. Okay, the bandages that you see here, what look like Band-Aids, these are the hinges, right, that keep that part down to the page. This lifts up, and then in the doorways, what is it that we see? We see the following. These are maps of the different lands that those dwellings belong to. David wrote the passage, Shvoch chamatcha, pour out your wrath, in the various languages in which Jews spoke in these many different countries. So he wrote, pour out your wrath in Judeo-Italian, in Judeo-Persian, in Ladino, Judeo-Arabic. You get the point. You can imagine the amount of homework that went into creating this page, the amount of careful research and time that David had to invest to bring this brilliant page to fruition, right? And there's the opposite side of the page, literally the Shvoch chamatcha, pour out your wrath. This cup that you see here is on a hinge, literally on a hinge, and it turns down, right? So it's literally as if the wrath is pouring out. Again, going back, sorry about that, just jumped. What do we see here? We see the image of the rabbit. Again, the persecuted Jew represented by the rabbit in the talons of the eagle. Nishmat kol chai tivrech et shemcha. Every breath of life will bless your name. Right, a piyut, that a poem that we recite, right, on the festivals. Right, every breath of life shall bless your name. And if you take a look here, even the most microscopic of organisms, right, is singing the praise of God. And then finally, David's last page of his Haggadah, Lashana haba b'Yerushalayim habnuya, next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem. Again, you see intricate micrography all around this frame. The micrography that you see here is a midrash which mentions 70 different names of Jerusalem. Every single one of those special names of Jerusalem is in red ink. And then the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, right, that not only look like Jerusalem stone, but also look like matzah, right? The bricks themselves look like the perforated, textured surface of the matzah. And then next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem, right, notice the difference, right? In Israel, we say next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem. In the diaspora, one says next year, simply next year in Jerusalem. So I am happy to take any other questions or observations that you have as we near the finish line. Beatrice, you just have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I would like to give you a yeshikoah for the way you do this. I feel as if we did the Seder, because
Wow.
for the two of us, we are not going to do a big thing, but I feel as if you walked us through the Seder, and you
Thank you.
did it beautifully. Yeshikoah.
Thank you. Bruchim to you. All of you.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amen.
Hi, Matt. Hello, everybody. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, Diane.
Sitting here with the Mos Haggadah, which I was so excited when I bought so many years ago when I was in Israel. And then I, once again, want to thank the LaBelle family because that Haggadah is phenomenal. So even though it's just Howard and myself, this time I'm going to put these books on the table and constantly reference them, to go back and see everything and try to see where my notes, will absolutely go with AH photo. I also had the pleasure of getting David Morse's, all his ketubah was in this big thing, transition, transformation. And so he is such an incredible man. And Israel is very lucky to, have him, and that the two of you became such good friends and have this wonderful thing called Ha'ot is amazing. And anybody who, when the days are good, we can get back to Israel safely, to just go and spend time with Matt and David at a Kahalot session, because it's worth every minute.
Thank you, Diane.
This was a
you're all invited to come visit us at Kol Ha'ot. We have a studio in Chutzot HaYotzer in the Artists Colony just below the Jaffa Gate. I'm very, very happy that Diane mentioned this idea of bringing these Haggadot to our Seder table this year. And I want to say that that's one of the most beautiful traditions that you can have. In the middle of the Seder table, put out different Haggadot that people can grab, that you can grab, that you can, bring all sorts of different perspectives to your conversation Seder night. Have an environmental Haggadah on the table, have a feminist Haggadah on the table, have perhaps a Corona Haggadah on the table. I think it's a great way of enriching the whole experience. Ronald.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. It's a pleasure meeting you. Susan Sedek invited me to the meeting. I'm using your Lovell Haggadah this year. I'm not at home in New York. I mean, it's the only one I have available. I wish I could do what you just said. And I was wondering if perhaps I could take maybe 10 minutes of your time after the meeting, or a different day, maybe tomorrow, whenever you have a chance, just to, I have a couple of practical questions to ask you regarding the Haggadah. I shipped it to my Zoom friends and family around the country. But I still, since I'm going to lead this for 20 people on Zoom, I would love to have a chance to chat with you for a moment.
Absolutely, Ronald. Let's make a date for tomorrow. And
very good.
My email is rabbimattberkowitz@gmail.
Matt, let me write it. Matt Berkowitz, your full name, yes?
Yes, Rabbi Matt with 2 T's. Berkowitz at Gmail.
I know how to spell it, at Gmail.
Yes.
What time would be convenient for you, sir?
Email me and we'll set up a time.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments, anything else that you want to share? Something that you're going to be doing special for Seder that you want to share?
We'll use the Matt Berkowitz Haggadah that we own and love so dearly.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
Matt?
Yes.
Matt, how long did it take David to create his Haggadah, and how did he go about deciding how it was going to be published for the general public?
Great. So as you can imagine, this was meant to be a one-off. When Dick and B. Levy of blessed memory commissioned this Haggadah, the idea was to create only one of a kind. And as David began work on this Haggadah, he had a very, very dear friend. His name is Neil Nuri. from Rochester, New York. Some of you may know Rabbi Hillel Nori, who is in Atlanta, Georgia, one of our most talented graduates of the Jewish Theological Seminary. So it was Neil Nuri that really twisted David's arm to bring it out to the Jewish world, not just for the Levi family, but to really share this with the world. In fact, I'll also share with you that on the original binding of the Mos Haggadah, it doesn't say the Mos Haggadah. It says the Levi Haggadah on the original binding, right? Which tells you that it was meant to be a one-off and specifically for the Levi family. The Levi family gave permission to David to take the original Mos Haggadah to Italy and to bring it to one of the top printers in Italy, who was one of the only printers in the world at the time that was able to recreate the paper cuts, the gold leaf, all of the intricacies. And David ended up creating 500 limited edition Haggadot. And then after he created those limited edition Haggadot, he created the coffee table edition, as it were. That's the edition that we could all own in our homes, and so that's
that we mere mortals can have.
Exactly. That's a lovely way of saying it. Yes. But I do want to tell you that every Seder I always refer to 2 or 3 of David's images. I never get bored of them. I'm always very much taken by the depth of Torah, by the content. It's not just the artwork that he created, but it's also the message behind each of these pieces. And that's what I recommend to you. If you have this Haggadah, right, don't attempt to go through David's Haggadah cover to cover like we just did. But we didn't even get through all of the illuminations. But rather curate the pieces that you want to bring to your Seder table and let them open. Let them open to. Let them open themselves up to questions. I also know from the last session, we sent out a number of pieces. We sent out a packet that I put together called Creative Ideas to Enrich Your Seder. We sent out a suggested outline for the Lovel Haggadah. And we also sent the pandemic prayer. If you didn't receive it, or if you're new on this call, just type your email address in the chat, and Dorit and Joan will be sure that you receive those mailings as well. Also, we are happy to send the Atbash chart to all of you so that you have it in hand. That's something that is really nice to bring to the table, and you just have to remember every year you recalibrate that chart. Right, beginning with the first day of Passover, not the first night of Passover, the first day of Passover. So Aleph, if Seder takes place on a Tuesday night, then the first day of Passover is Wednesday, right? And so on. And then you go Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and just recalibrate that way. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up?
I hope everyone will join us next Monday at 1:15 during Chol HaMoed for our final session. And thank you so much, Matt.
A pleasure. There's a commercial for our final session. We're going to be taking a look at this Haggadah that is hot off the press called the Express Haggadah. And this is a creation of myself and a physician from Houston, Texas, one of my former students, Dr. Ron Moses. And the idea behind this Haggadah, he approached me 2 years ago with this idea, deeply concerned because his family could not sit through a whole Seder. And he wanted to distill the Seder experience to its essence, to its core components. So this is what we're going to be taking a look at on April 13th, when we gather again together.
Hey, great.
So with that, I want to thank my partners in crime this evening. Dorit Rabbani and Joan Goodman, thank you so much for your technical and logistical support in making this happen.
Thank you, Matt.
On
And
behalf of all of us.
and apologies too for the new passwords we have to use.
Yes, there's a phenomenon called Zoom bombing, which you may have heard of, in which these Zoom spaces are violated by unfortunate people. And so a password was created, but then we got a little mired in the complexities of that. So we apologize for that. We apologize for the delay. And again, want to thank Carolyn Cantor from the Jewish Theological Seminary's office in Florida for really initiating this idea. Carolyn, we can't thank you enough. You're the one that really takes the credit for bringing this Beit Midrash together. So thank you for making this happen.
All you, Matt. Thank you.
On behalf of the entire Jewish Theological Seminary, we want to wish all of you a happy, healthy, and kosher Pesach this year. It'd be a very, very meaningful Pesach for you. And we're really thrilled that we were able to make this happen, to bring this forum together, to hopefully give you some inspiration and innovation as we go forth to celebrate this very, very unusual Seder or Sedarim this year. So, Chag Bari, Kasher V'Sameach from Jerusalem. Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim Habnuya, next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem. And may El Al get back into the skies along with every airline.
Right.
And Hiravi Amenu very soon in our day.
Thank you very much. Kol Tuv. Kol Tuv.
Thank you.
See you on the
Matt,
13th.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hopefully
Bye, Matt.
next year we can do this again, Matt. Love you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Linda.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Stay healthy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
How do I say goodbye?
You could just click on leave meeting.
Yes, that's what I just did.
Bye.
Mhm.